Shall I start? Great. We have a
Yeah.
okay, so wonderful. We have a great group representing key leaders in tech innovation and significant silos supporting rare disease patients. Each of them have a commitment to patients beyond the buzzword of patient centricity. So I think it'd be interesting to sort of explore two questions, maybe one question and sort of, I don't think we have time for two, but maybe one would be enough. But the basic assumption is that digital health platforms facilitate increased research and ultimately better health outcomes for patients. My question is, I think it'd be interesting to knock it around a little bit, is as the platforms depend on quality and quantity of data, are they really optimized for the significant struggles in patients' daily lives? So I think that'd be interesting to talk about. I guess everybody should introduce themselves. I'll start and everybody can sort of jump in. My name is Sean Gordon. I have an organization called rarefundingteam.com. And what we do is we connect rare patient organizations we basically try to find volunteer digital marketing professionals for rare patient organizations. Before I became a rare disease patient, I was a tech guy for over 25 years, and most recently CEO of a big data company in Israel. So why don't we now just go around the table, everybody could introduce, maybe Gavin, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks very much to Jeff and Eden for the invite, and thanks Sean for moderating this session. My name's Gavin Jones. I'm Director of Rare Disease for Open Health. We're a global healthcare communications value and access agency. And what does that actually mean? Well, we are often the bridge between a pharmaceutical company and other stakeholders within the rare disease community. So for example, we may support the education of healthcare professionals in a new therapy or in a disease area. We may help communicate the value of a new medicine to payer stakeholders. And we may develop applications to support patients, both within clinical trials, but also when they are initiated onto treatment in the real world. So we come, I suppose, with digital experience. We have an in-house digital team, but we also come with the communications experience. And I think that's what I'm going to bring to the panel today, is that we can't just rely on technology to deliver better outcomes in rare disease. We need to ensure that we wrap good communications around it to demonstrate the value of applying the technology to support better outcomes.
You're muted,
You're on mute.
Cecile?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very grateful to join the panel today. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and Regulatory Science at Aparito, which is a medtech company specialized in remote patient monitoring and particularly rare disease and pediatric population. I have a bit the unusual background, having made the move from 11 years at the European Medicine Agency to joining Aparito, which is led by Eileen Half-Davis, who I also met at EMA. And I think I will concur with what Gavin said. I think that the idea is that tech only is not going to suffice to address the need of patients. And I think particularly in the rare disease, as you need to work with the communities and all the end users of the technology in order to really design the technology in a holistic manner. And also, as we are going to discuss, maybe Femida is in the panel, the need for real-world data. I think it's absolutely key to have technology that is designed fit for regulatory purposes, even in the daily life of patients, since if those data are fit for regulatory purposes, then they can be used later on to accelerate research. And I think that's the added value I might bring to the discussion today. Thank you.
Great, so maybe I'll go ahead then. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation
today. So my name is Famida Gwadri Sridhar, and I'm the founder and CEO of Pulse InfoFrame. And so we are a company that have really focused on evidence-based medicine and evidence generation. And as a company, what we've done is built an evidence generation platform. And essentially what that means is if we think about, clinical trials, the clinical trials provide obviously what we call level 1 evidence, the highest level of evidence. But as Cecile noted, it's really important to have real world data, which really speaks to how people experience a new intervention in real life outside of a clinical trial. And also using real world data to help us think about formulating a hypothesis and to help us with drug development. So what we've done at Pulse is essentially created a platform technology to really focus on bringing together data from multiple stakeholders, those being patients, advocacy groups, pharma biotech, as well as clinicians and researchers. My background is I was formerly a professor of medicine and computer science, building global collaboration in the area of informatics and oncology, but subsequently have been focused very much over the last few years on rare disease and rare cancers. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
You had a presentation you wanted to show?
Well, I wanted to share a couple of slides for maybe to kick off the discussion, if that's okay.
What I thought.
Yeah,
that's
perfect. Thank you. And this is for all of our, I don't know if I'm in presentation mode, and can people see that okay? Go to the next slide. So if you can see the slide, I thought it might be a good discussion point for all of us to some degree. And I think the reason I wanted to put this up here is essentially, the solution is not straightforward. If you listen to what Gavin said about the importance of being able to communicate with people, I think it raises a question of health literacy. Cecile, I'm sure, has a different view, and around wearables and also the utilization and availability of data. And when we thought about how we best support the rare disease community, I think what we really thought about was everybody's an N of one. Every patient journey is different. And how do you actually then characterize and collect data that's going to help address a particular condition, but also recognize that everybody is different? And that's really very tricky. And I think that's where the work that my esteemed colleagues are really focusing on will help inform how we think about the patient journey. So Sean, I don't know if you're open to having others maybe comment on their view, and then I have a couple more slides, and then I'm happy to, step back. But
I think this is fantastic, because I think you're anticipating and discussing your company's vision and platform, and you're putting meat on the bone so we can all talk about this. It's fantastic. Thank you. So keep going. Yeah, if you have more.
Yeah. So yes, I do. So there are a few additional. So one of the things that I did want to talk a little bit about was data quality. And so how do we actually, when we think about collecting data, there's been a lot of discussion about, the fact that data are global, the fact that we have different countries and different languages. And so this whole issue of translating data in multiple ways. Translation is either a language translation, but it's also taking the data that we currently have. So Sean, you mentioned that you were a CEO, of a large technology company in Israel. Obviously data quality was of the highest importance. And I think I'm in the wrong view here is what my team are telling me.
Challenges, by the way, was to make sure because our models request the data come in X format, and if the company that we're drawing it from is in Y, we had a whole lot of problems.
Right.
To make our models work.
Is this showing up okay now? Is it a proper view? Okay, sorry. Again, yeah, it's hard to believe that sometimes, I run a technology company because it's the simple things that anyway, we have to have a little humor in this. So Sean, thank you for that. But the one thing I did want to really point out here is that we have to focus on how the data are mapped and structured. Cecile mentioned that both her and Elaine were at the EMA, and I know that very much understanding how to characterize data and structure it is important. And I think this is very confusing for people sometimes because we're all very interested in collecting data, but it's not about the quantum of data. It's about the quality of data and then the mapping of data. And I've shown a very simple illustration here that shows that we use a unified data model. And what does that mean? It means that if I call something high blood pressure and you call it hypertension, we actually mean the same thing. But we need to be able to codify it in a way that the regulators are going to understand. Otherwise, there's a tremendous amount of effort collecting data that ultimately can't be shared or utilized for what we really want it to be, which is for trials ultimately and for drug therapy. And then what?
Sorry,
Sorry,
Femida.
Cecile, please.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think it's a very important point that you make, because also data collection in isolation really is creating a lot of challenge also at operational level afterwards, because everybody is repeating the same research and the same research question when that have to be addressed for several compounds. When you have a disease with a heavy pipeline behind, with clinical trials competing for patient recruitment, is really not helping anybody. So I think Femida's point is really important, to have these data standards that allows for collaborative research, but also accelerating research. And in a pre-competitive space, that's really a point that is sometimes hard to get across, and that's where working with the communities, the rare disease communities and patient group can help different stakeholders or different key players to understand what are the benefits of working around interoperability. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rita, can I jump in right now for a second?
Please.
Cecile, can you maybe speak to how, I mean, we've seen the platform of InfoFrame. How are you, with your wearables and those, how do you think how are you going to interact with that platform? In other words, how are you, because you're wanting to bring in data from the real world, and how are you going to interact with or interface with these kinds of platforms?
No, and thanks for the opportunity to comment on that, and probably Femida can chip in as well. So having Apparito technology that is being deployed on the patient phone, and as a patient interface, then collect real world data either from sensors that are connected to the phone, or from patient reported outcome or digital endpoints such as video protocols from the phone to the patient. And the idea with our technology is that it allows, so first of all, it is designed with the patient. So the patients needs to feel that they have their own interest being achieved by having this data collected, and they benefit from it. So that's really a tool that helps to monitor the disease, and with the technology that allows us to standard the data that are being collected across patients in a way that then would be added to Femida's platform, and then that are automatically being rearranged as per the common data model or other data standards, where you have such a collaborative platform where all the data are around the same format. So I think that we kind of pre-structure the data in a way that is harmonized and consistent across patients for a same disease, or for a clinical trial, or for registries also. And then Femida take it then to the next level and really put it in a way that it would fit with other similar studies. Femida, I don't know if...
Yeah, so thank you, Cecile. So I switched slides just for a moment, Sean, because the previous slide showed multiple diseases. And so I think the point there, just to close that point, was you don't want to build each disease registry or each disease on its own. Each disease is different. Each patient is different. But by having a platform that allows you to leverage knowledge across multiple diseases, which is what both ourselves and Apparito do, you actually learn from other diseases, and you're able to mine across different conditions to look for similarities, but also look for how treatments vary. And so it's really important to be able to understand across a breadth of diseases rather than each vertical. And so I think what Cecile was also mentioning is very true. So we have actually been collaborating with one another, Pulse and Aprito, for this particular reason. If you think about, what Gavin started with, it's about the communication, it's about ease of use, it's about, health literacy, it's about being able to have a workflow that's easy for the patient to understand, and to collect the endpoints in a very facile manner, whereby you're not asking the patient to go somewhere, you're bringing the technology to the patient. And that's really what I think we're focused on, is digitizing an environment in an easy to use way that's approachable by the patient. Gavin, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, definitely. And it's fantastic that we have this level of technology available, and the platform, and also the applications and the wearable technology. All this means that we can, as Famida says, facilitate and make data collection as easy as possible. But, and digital can take a lot of the heavy lifting, but we are asking technology to do a lot. Let me give you an example of that. We're working with a gene therapy manufacturer at the moment, and regulators, both the FDA and EMA, have asked the company to collect data on the durability and the safety of the gene therapy for 13 to 15 years. Now that is a significant length of time. And if you envisage a teenager and they receive gene therapy, and then you need to follow up that person for the next 15 years, the number of life changes that individual is going to go through. They're going to change care settings, probably from a gene therapy specialist center back to their local physician. They may go to college, they may get employment, they may move cities, they're going to get married, they may have kids. There is so much going on in that patient's life, and we expect them to collect data along the way. Now, as we've described, digital can really help, but we can't lose sight of the need, I think, to offer something back to that individual through education, through understanding that they have a role to play in the bigger picture of proving that gene therapy is safe for multiple patients following them. So it's about ensuring that we do apply the technology, but we ensure that we offer something back to the parent or the patient that has to collect the data or has to wear the wearable, because that will ensure that we get that quality of data. Because retention of either a patient or a healthcare professional over such a long period will be challenging, and we need to think of ways that we can facilitate and make that as smooth as possible and add value back to the patient or the parent.
No, let me chime in too.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, having experienced some things with having a rare disease daughter or rare disordered daughter, when you're in a crisis mode where those data points are really important, the last thing that as a parent that I am thinking about is, man, I better record those data points for the study. When I am more worried about, I'm going to have to give a life-saving injection, and I'm getting ready to call a hospital, and I'm getting ready to talk to an endocrinologist about my daughter, who I've never talked to before, at 2 a.m. Mm. Making it so that me as a parent, or that person that is involved in that, and even as they grow, I mean, we have seen in the community of late, just this last year, I can think of several individuals who were suffering from or have the same type of disorders Cambria does, that are adults, and passed away because there was something that was not caught as an adult, that they were there. So being able to capture, I totally agree, being able to capture that data in a way, and technology is there, but we got to leverage it in a way that the individual, make it easy for them. Voice activation, voice translation into some of these devices. I know it sounds a little Dick Tracy, like my my wearable watch type of a thing. But if I had, you know, with some of the technology that's available and being able to quantify it and being able to qualify it even with something like, you know, coupled with technologies even like blockchain, or, you know, to verify the data records as they come across. Even with some type of voice interaction, where if I'm giving medication to my daughter and I hit it, I speak it, and it records it and sends it in. You know, that's just off the cuff type of a thing. I'm not saying that, you know, I have the program means to do it, but being able to actually gather that data during that crisis time, you know, it's pretty simple. If I have time during the day and, oh, 5 o'clock, you know, we have technology in our house that dispenses her medication daily. She has to take medication 3 times a day. It's called Hero, and Hero chimes, sets off an alarm, and dispenses the medication. And, you know, Cambria is old enough now that she goes and gets it. But it helps us to track that data point and saying, yes, she is taking her medication on time. This is when she dispensed it. And it's very easy for her to do. But if she's sick, not so much, you know, even with that tech. So I just wanted to chime in because I think it's really cool seeing the variety of healthcare devices that we have available to the population, and just, you know, is it there to take it to that next step to make it so that that human interaction with that technology is seamless.
I think you raised an issue that was sort of near and dear to my heart. When we were doing our data analysis, we were using a sort of a form of neural networks, and we had a heck of a time getting data. And these were from professionals. These were from power plants who had really excellent records. I mean, the databases were generated by the equipment, and it was difficult. Now, and so it was, quote, objective, very easy. Here you're dealing with fathers and mothers that are in extreme stressful situations, and the data, essentially the outcomes, the treatments or the research is based upon the quality of the data. So my question would, I guess, to the group would be, you know, given the stress that many of these people, or I heard from Jeff and many people we've heard on this conference, how do we adapt that to get the data, the quality of data to get the outcomes? How do we adapt it to their lives? And number two, how do we also make sure that the whole process before the collecting the data, all the forms, all the interfaces are really appropriate for rare disease people? So I think those are really questions, because the back end data is probably relatively easy. The hard part is adapting to human beings. So that was my question. Maybe throw it out to the group.
So maybe I can take a crack at this, because I wanted to comment on what Gavin said, and then I'll mute so others can speak. But I put up this slide really in response to what Gavin talked about. You know, in research, we have a tendency to ask for data. We have a tendency to ask for people to enroll to trials, et cetera. And we had, as a company and personally, have always had a strong view that if you're asking somebody for something, you have to be able to give them something back so they can see how what they're providing to you is actually contributing to the greater good. And so I think, to answer your question, Sean, and to what Gavin was talking about, patient engagement is really not just about taking, it's about giving them back information, whether it's a dashboard to show how they're doing, showing them how to communicate with others in the network. So using some of the communication tools that Jeff was using. In order for us to figure out what's best and what works for patients, we actually do a lot of qualitative work. We do focus groups with patients. We use ethnography and in vivo, looking at the interaction. These are tools that are used to help determine how a person is interacting with your platform. Do they have visual impairments? You know, is your interface set up to deal with some of the considerations in that rare disease population, mobility included? And so, you know, as we look at evolving technology, and I'm not suggesting we have all the answers, there's some critical points here. If you're a stakeholder, you need to be able to get something back, because otherwise, to Gavin's point, if I'm, you know, somebody who's asked to contribute data over 15 years, I really don't care if somebody publishes a journal paper. What I really care about as a patient is what is it doing to help me get treatment, or helping my colleagues or people who've passed ahead of me? How is what they have provided actually helping others advance? And I think we can never lose sight of that. And I'm sure that Cecile has a view on, based on the wearables also. And just to kind of finish off, I think, Jeff, you made an important point about IVR technology, so voice recognition. It's not as advanced in healthcare, but absolutely, I think that we need to do more testing. And this was brought home to me when I was actually working with the CDKL5 population. And a lady said to me, a mom said, it's really great that we have all this data. It's really relevant to us. But remember, when my child is having a seizure and I'm holding my child with one hand, it's not even necessarily typing in on a mobile app. It's being able to speak quickly into an app that will recognize what I'm saying. So I think we need to sort of address the patient needs more carefully. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Femida. From our side, I think that we are very lucky that our CEO is originally a pediatric nurse, so it's kind of in our DNA to consider the patient input and needs, how to do that. And also we have Dan Lewy working with us, who I think is in the audience here. So it's really teamwork that we have in engaging with the population and the communities that are going to collect the data. I think in terms of our technology, because it's on a patient mobile, and when it goes down to sensor, it's even worse. It's like in people daily life. So already something that can be very invasive if you get it wrong. And I think the worst you can do with technology to get it wrong, because if you have zero data with it, I think it's it's not very helpful. And as Femida pointed out, so I think this is something we also have focus group and discussed with the patient and parents in order to consider the context of use, because in the context of a clinical trial also we are working on developing new endpoints at Aparito. You need to look at how to bring the technology in very stressful moments for the parents and the child, and how to anticipate that maybe you can't capture things the way you would have liked, and anticipate on that, have different options, and assess whether the wearable is the right thing for certain disease. Is it going to cause any stress to the child or to the patient, or and if there are alternatives to the wearables to collect data and look at the different time points also. So this is something that if you don't work with the patient from the beginning to the end, there are many chances you can get it wrong. And this is something, if I may add, because it's only been 2 years I'm working in a medtech company, I see a lot of technology company who really underestimate that, and they have very great piece of technology with very advanced mathematics behind it. But sometimes I struggle to understand how it can work with patients and whether there will be really any buy-in into this. And that's really something that is overlooked and underestimated, how much you need to co-develop things with patients. Thanks.
Sean, you're on mute. So I'm going to jump in, Sean, because you're on mute.
Jump in, Gavin.
Yeah, no, I agree with the points completely. I think your question around quality of data, Sean, yes, it's about the usability and the simplicity of data collection, but it's also about what you collect. And I'm sure both Cecile and Famida will agree with me here. It's about really understanding what outcomes are important to patients, what outcomes will demonstrate the value to payer stakeholders and healthcare professional stakeholders. So it's really not, it's both co-creation of the technology, but it's also collaboration around what's going to be collected. Is there an outcomes tool already developed, or do you need to work to develop a specific tool to capture the outcomes that really demonstrate that an intervention, an innovation, and a medicine is making a difference to a patient and their families' lives.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I was just saying is that I actually began, this is going back many years ago, in order to try to come to grips with my own declining gait due to my rare disease. I was thinking about using a smartphone. This is going back 5 or 6 years, using a smartphone as a gait monitor, and then uploading the data to the cloud and having some sort of calculation machine up in the cloud. And I found doing that simple task, just collecting gait data from a smartphone, being unbelievably complicated. So I'm saying that for these diseases where there's the endpoints are even the data is difficult to even understand. I'm wondering how do we prove to patients who are going through so much trouble, and really get into Famelia's point, how do we show the return on investment of all this hard work we're going to have to pump in? So I think that's a huge challenge. And before we even get to how they're going to collect it, what's the payoff in the short term and the longer term? So I think that's an interesting question to discuss.
So maybe, Jeff, unless you wanted to say something, I wanted to comment, but go ahead if you wanted to say something.
No, I have a different point. We're getting a couple of questions from the attendee gallery, but go ahead and finish your thought, Famita, and then we'll come back to these questions. Let's not break the chain here.
Yeah, so I think there are two things. One is, as Cecile said, there are a number of considerations that we have to think about, with how we're collecting data and including the patient. But I also want to just put out there that there is no one solution that fits everybody's needs. And so I think we have to kind of have a constellation of different tools and different technologies, because not everybody's going to fit in the same box, essentially. And, to your point, Jeff, you were talking about using the HERO system. About 15 years ago, when I was doing work in medication adherence, there were a lot of reminder systems that were being built. And eventually patients said to us, it drives me nuts when my phone rings or whatever. So I think there's an evolution of the patient and the evolution of the technology that needs to meet the patient. And so that intersection is something where there's always a little bit of balance that's required. And I think just going to the point that Sean made, data quality is predicated on, defining the type of data that you need from each of your stakeholders, and that evidence generation comes from clinical trials all the way to getting the drug supported post-approval and paid for, because as we know, not every drug that gets approved gets funded. And so we really have to think carefully about the data, and we don't always know what data you need right up front. So start small, create, a minimal data set, because if we try to boil the ocean, we're going to have all kinds of trouble with feasibility. So I always like to take a pragmatic approach. And if you forgot something, you add it later on. So that was it. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. So, there's a good point that a person in the audience that she was part of, she's disabled. And she said that, we're talking a lot about families, obviously parents with children, and there is a lot of talk about that. But she is a person that she's single, she lives alone. And, sometimes technology can be challenging for some individuals, but she has a notebook system that's very elaborate. And I think that that's an interesting point. We're talking about devices that we wear, we're talking about smartphones, we're talking about voice recognition. But what about, even like, somebody finds that they can write something down in a notebook and scanning that data in. I mean, our recognition software today has improved so much, but being able to even collect those data points from a source such as that, and whether somebody has to go by and be an assistant there, or providing that technology through even snapshots with a smartphone, might be something that ease of use, because I know some people still like to write stuff down, and maybe not even like it. Maybe that's the wrong word, but that is their segue. That is their record keeping, which is highly efficient. Thoughts from the group on that?
Yes, maybe I can start and the others complement. I would think that's where it all starts. and for many diseases, there is nothing. So I think anybody who has their own way of collecting data around their disease and monitoring their disease, regardless of whether it's high tech or good old fashioned with notebook, which I like as well, it's definitely something to share with, and that's where we can see how can we structure the technology around that and make it even easier. And then is it something that we can extend to other patients in the same disease and learn more about the disease? I think when I was at EMA, one of the biggest challenge I have faced and where I got frustrated, so I developed a framework for extrapolation of data and quantification of existing knowledge. And you know, you have pharmacometrics, you have big data and all of that. And when it comes down to pediatric and rare disease, you don't have data to quantify in a way, enough data to be quantified in a way that you can run model and predict how a drug is going to react and how a patient is going to react. And I think that the characterization of disease natural history data, regardless of the way it is, if anybody has anything, it's really something that is adding the first stone into something that can be then created and expanded to others. And that maybe goes back to Femida's point, like let's start small, simple and easy, and then look at how to build, rather than if you come with something big scale and disrupt everybody, it's probably you are going to spend more energy convincing people than just working from the beginning with individuals. I don't know if it addressed your point, or but yeah.
I think I'll add to that, Cecile. I think Femida made a good point around flexibility, making sure that data collection fits with the unique needs of individual patients. And I think for me, there's probably a point around ownership. And if we can mobilize patients through whatever functionality they need, if we can mobilize patients to be owners of their own data, owners of data collection, let's be as flexible as possible in how that data is collected. And if we can do that, I think we'll get far greater retention of patients in programs like this, and better quality data that will demonstrate value of treatments or value of interventions that then ensure that funding can happen into the long term. Because I think proven value of new innovation is not a one moment in time now. It's like a long-term demonstration of the value. Just because you get through FDA or EMA, as we know, your drug may not get paid for. So that long-term demonstration of value is so important, and that's why ownership, patient ownership of their own data collection will be so important into the future.
So maybe I can just add to that. You know, when we started building the Castleman's registry, which is a global registry, one of the things that we were struck by is that patients have reams and reams of data that come out of their electronic health record. And then how do you actually go through, and we're talking about thousands of patients, and Dr. David Foggenbaum, who started the Castleman's Network, you know, we sat down and tried to look at different types of NLP, or natural language processing, but they're not all made the same. And so that's one of the challenges. So I completely agree with the panelists that we have to be flexible, and paper needs to come in, and using technology like OCR, but we also have to be careful that we understand that no one tool like natural language processing is a panacea, right? So I think we have to set expectations also with patients that the data that you collect is very, very important. I mean, often I talk to patient groups who say, look, I've collected a lot of data and I've handed it to this investigator and I don't see what's happened with it. So we have to be able to think about how we take all of this written documentation, find the nuggets that we need to really help with the evidence generation, but also encourage people, as you said, to be owners of their data, but also there has to be joint accountability around the use of data and how we're going to be able to use it to support drug delivery and beyond. So.
I want to throw a little bit of a, I'm not going to say hand grenade, but a little bit of throw something in here. I, I believe this from my own experience is that you have, on the one hand, you have the it's called the researcher world, research industry world, and you have the patient world. And in many ways, the data platform is supposed to mediate between the two. But what I've seen in my, again, I don't have a huge experience in the rare community, but I noticed that there's a missing link, but they don't connect entirely perfectly. That some people, some individuals are going to contribute their data well, but many people will not. And I believe that patient advocates, really the patient come from the community, are the bridge to really connect the two. If the person, if the data has not been going into the platform, somebody has to give them a call. What's going on with your life? Are you okay? And I think that kind of a conversation between, not from the corporate advocacy people, but the actual the organic or rare disease people who can communicate, who have empathy with those people. I think that kind of a conversation will be able to then bridge and draw out data. And I think that is a link that I have not seen well articulated. Maybe it is, and again, I certainly haven't seen everything, but I'm just throwing it out there as a concept and see what your thoughts are.
So, Sean, I think that's a great point, and I'm sure that Cecile will want to speak to this too. So, as a platform, what we've done is built that bridge that allows people to come in from multiple areas, because not every patient is seeing a doctor. Many patients are they're coming in through advocacy or individually, and so you need to be able to bridge the data, but that's really just the technical bridge. What you're talking about is the human factor and that human bridge, right, to bring all of the stakeholders together. And so, the way we've thought about that is to have patient ambassadors and navigators, because people don't intentionally not enter data. I know that's a double negative, but people are well-intentioned by nature. They want to be able to provide data, but it's not always top of mind if you have a sick child you're looking after at that particular moment in time. So even though the platform can send out, reminders to people and engage them, sometimes you actually need somebody to hold your hand and take you through the process. And so that's something that we're launching in the fall, which is essentially next month, a whole new process around thinking about navigation, just like you would at a hospital where you need a patient navigator. We need patients who can help patients, who understand exactly how patients feel. And that's not a technology, that's somebody else who's exactly like you, or as close to possible as you. Does that make sense?
And my own experience is, because I started from the non-rare disease world. I have an adult onset disease. So by the age of 50-ish, I became now a rare disease patient. So I've seen the world from both sides, and I could see that once I talked to people, and I'm now a patient. The barriers. I'm now on their team. I've crossed a barrier, and I think it's difficult for people who are not rare disease patients to get the same level of trust. And I think that the trust issue is going to really, I think, is the glue between the two worlds. The platform is the platform. It's the glue of I would call it the soft stuff that glues them together. And I think your ambassador program, you navigate, and I would even say more. And I throw this to Cecile and to Gavin, is do we know all through the process from the before they even see you, maybe through the process of the registries in natural history, are those documentations really user-friendly to a rare disease person? And because it's really, if you build it from the very beginning, then I would actually say a 360 degree view of the process, you can then, I think, increase the quality of your data. And any thoughts on particularly on that issue? Are we clear? Are we doing that to help people?
Well, I think what we'll see more and more of, Sean, is patient advocacy groups actually being owners of their own patient communities' data. So we'll see advocacy groups developing more registries. We'll see advocacy groups leading natural history programs, which will hopefully seed clinical research in disease areas that have been neglected to date. So I think we will see a shift of ownership of data. And someone said to me a nice quote the other day, particularly for patient advocacy groups, given that COVID is probably impacted on funding, patient data could be the most valuable thing a patient advocacy group holds into the future, because they can apply that data to support better funding in their specific disease area, and even apply that data to support pharmaceutical companies collect data over the long term. So I think that's probably a view to the future, is greater ownership of patient community data.
And if I may, I think Femida made a very important point about ownership. I think it's very important that the patient feel the owner of their data, and that they get something back from it in order to help them and facilitate them the monitoring and dealing with their disease in their daily life. So I think that if, and maybe going back to the points made and the question from the lady saying that she has her own data set, I think that it's very important that people don't feel overwhelmed maybe by the process, as you mentioned, to go to the natural history study and then to registry, and thinking about all the methodologies and all the hurdles they will have, and from the beginning, okay, keep in mind, yes, maybe we would like to structure our community in a way that with our data we can build something and facilitate research in areas that are of interest to our community, but without putting too much pressure on them, because I think already from very early on, patients collecting data that matters to them, we can already identify trends on where is it possible to have common agreement on what is of interest to all the different parties without adding another burden to a patient or their families. I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think
And there's a
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, there's a good segue into that from a question from someone saying, as we look at, when we're talking about platforms and registries and these, Gavin, to what you were saying about these advocacy groups owning their own data, the organizations, is there enough education there and available so that, one, they're collecting the data points right? Because like you said, you can collect stuff, but if it's not of a good quality, if we're just collecting junk, you're going to get junk out. And I clean that up a lot, when I say that. But if someone is thinking about starting that journey, one, is there education available? But two, is there a starting point for them to be able to establish that good group if they want to start collecting their own data? Who should they go talk to? Is that us that are here and collecting that? Is there education available for them?
Yeah, I would say that there is, Jeff. I mean, we do a lot of webinars. Sorry. We do a lot of webinars around, what should a patient advocacy group be thinking about when they're collecting data, et cetera. And I think part of, there seems to be this pressure that people feel to set up a registry, and they go ahead and they try to build this big registry, but you really need to take baby steps and think about, what do I need? How am I going to use it? And can I then leverage the same technology in the same group and the same people? And I'm just going to put something out there. It's not just about technology, right? At Burrito have wearables. We have a platform. What people don't always realize is that there's a tremendous amount of expertise and experience that goes in behind all of this. The science really does matter. And sometimes people forget about the importance of science and data science and really thinking through the types of information that we want to be able to collect, if that makes sense. And so, I would posit, and I don't want to be controversial about this, but, patients own their own data. Advocacy don't necessarily own all of the patient data. And this is an important consideration because in all the registries that I have built over 25 years and our team have built, sometimes you have different advocacy groups who actually don't get along with one another. And then you create this terrible situation where patients don't know where to contribute their data. And so I think what we have to really think about is a new paradigm where we're thinking about collaboration. One advocacy group may have a different focus than another group. There's no reason for us not to be able to share data amongst groups with the appropriate governance structure and global unique identification numbers allowing us to share de-identified data. So again, that kind of ensures that we're not all collecting the same data and recreating things over and over again, which we continue to see.
Yeah, I'd agree, Famida. I think that's often the frustration of data collection is that there are multiple stakeholders doing it. So you can have a pharmaceutical company with their own registry, you can have physicians with their own registry, you can have patient groups, even individual patient groups with their own data collection. So I completely agree that that collaboration is an important element. In terms of the question, Jeff, I think really having a trusted scientific committee as part of your advocacy group is an important step, and asking them to advise on data collection is another important step, because they will understand if there are physician-owned, and I use that in inverted commas, physician-owned data collection, or if there are other data collections, will help advise on what types of data should be collected and what's the first step towards it. So that can really help.
Fantastic. We lost Sean for a second. There was another question that came in, and Gavin, it was specifically for you. Going back to where you mentioned there was a 15-year evidence collection on the gene therapies, and do you think this needs to be done from, what do you think needs to be done from a communication point of view to communicate to the patient community to help with making sure that criteria is met?
I think it's unprecedented challenges that we face. I think there are some critical things from a communications perspective that we can apply. I think, firstly, every patient and every physician initiating gene therapy at the moment are really pioneers. They're global leaders in this innovative therapies that hopefully will transform many patients' lives living with rare disease. We are at the start of a long journey, but I think the journey we should try and aim for is that gene therapy becomes standard of care for patients, and it becomes, a very straightforward initiation that will transform their lives. And at the moment, it's quite frustratingly restricted to a number of rare diseases. We need to expand that out into multiple rare diseases. So, the promise is there. And from a communications perspective, certainly recognizing that these initial patients that do receive gene therapy are pioneers, and recognizing that within communications, ensuring that there's good connectivity between healthcare professionals. So like I said, the patient will receive gene therapy and probably a year's follow-up at a specialist center. But what happens beyond that, that patient will be referred back to their local physician. So that local physician needs to understand their role and responsibility in the long-term data collection. I think everything should be centered around the patient, because they are the only consistent through the process. They will be the ones that receive therapy. They will be the ones that hopefully have transformative changes with their rare disease. They will be the ones that will start living life and going through all those different changes to life circumstances. So centering the communications and the data collection around the patient, I think is really important.
Well, and I would agree. I mean, even, and I'll refer to our children, we're teaching them to be the best advocate for themselves, because you know, you as a parent have to do that, but the importance of them knowing what is important to watch out for, and even in collecting those data points themselves for their own. Yes, we can go in and help everybody, but you're right, the patient themselves owning that and owning their healthcare to that point is good. I agree. Welcome back.
My internet died.
I was wondering if we have time for, I don't know when the session is ending, but I've seen also a very interesting question in the chat box about the challenges of having blood test being made and data collection around that. And I think it's very important to understand that you can quantify or characterize a disease not necessarily based on the blood test and labs test. And I think that in the regulatory term, we say to measure and characterize how is the patient feeling and functioning. And that is what we are really trying to do at Aparito, to do that in a way that it's not only wearables, it's really about finding the right way to capture a patient disease, and if the patient is feeling comfortable or is responding well or not sufficiently to a treatment, or yes, and if the treatment needs to be adapted, and that's what we are trying to do. So I think really in short, any ideas are welcome, particularly in rare disease where there are so few disease-specific endpoints. We can be very creative. We can really bend some of the rules which require that, you know, sometimes when you are in disease and you can run a trial on 10,000 patients, you really have to tick all the regulatory boxes. Here we are working on very small number of patients, and we have the regulatory framework to be innovative here without compromising the quality of data. That's where I think the technology can really help with the flexibility, the innovation, and thinking outside of the box, like what is important to you in your daily life, and are there any new tools that can help you to do that? And I think that's all the patient should think about, and the rest should be left to the IT people. But maybe that's a bit extreme, but I guess when you buy a car, you don't need to understand how the car is working bottom up. But yeah, thank you.
Can I maybe just add a quick point to what Cecile is saying? So I very much agree. And I think the example I would use is that when we're always looking at, you know, has something made a difference, we look at the statistical difference. But really, a statistical difference is not something that you can actually identify in a rare disease person or population, where the change that a patient may feel may be very small. So we've actually developed something that's been published called the minimally available important difference. What's important from a patient's perspective and is clinically relevant where it may not be a statistical difference. And so I think we have to look at data in a different way, so that we're not looking for big differences, which we're never going to find, but we're looking for meaningful differences. And the only other comment I wanted to make goes back to education and what Gavin was talking about. You know, when we look at the institutional review boards, or the REBs, however they're characterized in any country, there is a requirement that we have reams of documents explaining to patients what we're doing with the data and what we're doing in a particular study. All are important in a clinical trial. But we have to look at a way to simplify information in the way that it's presented to patients, so that it doesn't take them a day to understand 5 pages. And it's not because they don't understand, it's that it's complex information being presented. And I think, Gavin, if there are innovative ways to present consents to patients using, you know, voice and different caricatures, or whatever it is that we can do, I think that we have to think about that also as part of the educational process.
It's interesting you point out, Famida, because you're talking about the qualitative difference in our disease group. There's a I would say a struggle maybe a difference of opinion perhaps between the people. And again, you're talking about adult onset. You know what's maybe for people who are 50 plus. Well, maybe we'll never find a cure for our disease. But gosh, it'd be really great to even have 10% better functionality, 15% better functionality. I mean, and so how do you wire in these small subtle differences? And really and so that's that. I think that could be. I'm not even sure that's even on the table half the time, because everybody wants to hit the home run and get the goal, get the treatment, and we check that box. Boy, you're really great. But for the people who are living with it, even again, I can speak personally. 10% would be wonderful. If I could walk 10% better, that'd be excellent. So I think these kinds of conversations around qualitative improvements rather than quantitative improvements vis-a-vis the home run, maybe a conversation that I don't hear that happening too often. Because again, with due respect, oftentimes is being taught, the patients aren't initiating these conversations. So I think that may be an important distinction.
And that's why it's important to collect the data to understand how much improvement you can get from a treatment or physiotherapy or any intervention, and help you to raise the voice, to put the data behind the fact that, okay, the patient says, I'm feeling better. And for me, that's enough. I know that in some neuromuscular disease in children, for them to be able to move the arm means that they can eat, they can brush their tooth, they can brush their hair, and that means already a lot to them. And that's something that when you have the data to say, okay, he can move in a much smoother way their arm alone or with some probes, that is something that you can really characterize and quantify in a way that you can add weight to the table, to the discussion, and that's beyond individual perceptions, which is something that is important when you come to regulators or to HTA bodies. And that's where the technology help, like with the video protocols that we are developing. The idea is to take videos and put some algorithm in order to characterize how the movement is progressing one way or the other with artificial intelligence, and be able to put the data behind how the patient is feeling and functioning in a way that is different than just ticking boxes of a PRO and papers.
Yeah, I think we learned a lot recently, well, from the rare neuromuscular community in terms of a couple of things really. Firstly, a lot of the focus was around pediatrics, and there were, the patient, the adults, or the teenage communities felt disenfranchised from the conversations about new therapies coming to market. And I think also what we saw was that the evidence base that was applied to a number of therapies, say in Duchenne's, didn't hit the mark with payers and left disappointment. So I think Cecile makes some really good points around ensuring that the technology is used to measure things that actually make a difference to the patient's lives, the family's lives, but also demonstrates value to the health system in initiating a new therapy in a disease like that.
Hey, Sean, let me jump in. And one of the participants out here did ask a valid question. We're talking a lot about collecting data for treatments, but one of the things that is interesting to talk about too, just as we've only got about another 4 or 5 minutes, but in tracking these data points and tracking like the progression of the disease or the disorder, and providing other non-medical services, or how is that going to impact society? The social aspect of this in helping individuals as we see these progressions, and knowing that this is going to progress a certain way, and what services can be laid out for them.
So can I maybe just a quick comment? I don't know, Jeff, if that was directed specifically to Sean. If it was, then please go ahead. But I mean, I think that the key thing, you know, in real world data is that you are following the patient journey. And the only way that you really understand what future needs are to be able to collect both the quantitative and the qualitative data. So even with health economics and outcomes research or health technology assessment, we're very much focused on a specific period of time and primarily what the direct costs are. And I think what you're alluding to are the indirect costs, and those indirect costs from an economic perspective are all of the things that people need to encounter in their daily lives and deal with that extend beyond the medical visits, et cetera. And then understanding from joint patient experiences, shared collaboration around what did other people do in this situation. And as Cecile alluded to, you know, there have been advances in technologies with machine learning and artificial intelligence that if we think about the data that are going to provide value, both qualitative and quantitative, we can then set up a mechanism to share those data with other people within that disease community and beyond. So that, I'm not saying we've solved it, that's just sort of the way that I'm looking at it.
A quick comment from me. I think we need to get better at truly understanding burden of illness. I think this is so important to encourage investment in clinical research, investment in new therapies. So I think the questioner makes a really good point in terms of understanding disease progression and also the impact that has on the patient, the family, and society as a whole. And we need to work harder to get to the essence of true burden, because that will demonstrate why we need to make a change and develop research and develop new therapies.
I think that's a great, we're almost, I think, out of time, Jeff. Gavin, that was a great sort of coda on the conversation. Thank you very much. I don't, are we done? We're out of time, right there, Joe?
Yeah, we're right on the cusp of it here. So
I want to say, thank you. It was very, very informative for me to be able to hear people who are really in the industry speak about the issues they're working on. Hopefully Jeff and I are sort of on the other end of the spectrum. We're the kind of the customers of all this, and I got a lot of it. So thank you, and I hope many of the people out there in the audience and the participants got a lot of it. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I want to thank everyone from My City Med and the Rare Fair. Thank you so much. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Sean, thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.